Dear participants, welcome to the 2-week refresher course in education. Today's topic for deliberation is equity, inclusion, and multidisciplinary higher education. Right since the National Education Policy 2020 document was released on 29th of July 2020, lots of discussions, deliberations, seminars, conferences are being held in different parts of the country. And this is one being from the discipline of education, teacher education, probably. I personally feel that all of us should get to know about the basics, about the underlying principles and basic tenets of what it means to understand and implement the spirit of equity, inclusion in our classrooms, beyond classrooms as well, in our academic environment, wherever we find an opportunity to interact with the students, to deal with the students. So here I'm with you to discuss about this topic. The first part, I'll be discussing about equity and inclusion, the concept, how do we perceive about it, equity and inclusion? How should we understand the concept of equity and inclusion in education? And in later part, I'll deliberate upon the multidisciplinary higher education. All these themes are taken from the National Education Policy 2020. Well, to begin with, as you can see in the slide, the equitable and inclusive education, learning for all. This topic includes the concept of equity, inclusion, that is there in the chapter 6 of the National Education Policy document. Equity and inclusion in higher education has been dealt in the chapter 14 of the National Education Policy document. Both of these chapters are to be understood simultaneously. That makes things more comprehensible. And the third part that I am going to deliberate on is towards a more holistic and multidisciplinary higher education that has been dealt in chapter 11 of the National Education Policy document. To begin with the concept of equity, nothing is so specific about, as all of you belong to the discipline of education, to the field of education. So equity word is not new to all of us that we understand. But as far as we know, the first time when I particularly got to, deal with this word equity, so the first thing came to my mind was that this equity term is widely used in business world, corporate, where equity means assets, sharing of assets and liabilities of any business settlements. But in the field of education, in the field of society, this equity has a significant meaning. If you will search in the dictionaries, various dictionaries will give you different types of, pair of words to understand this word. But in general, in particularly when we are dealing with education, when we are dealing with society, social justice, then this term has a meaning that says, that suggests that equity is a system of jurisprudence founded on principles of natural justice and fair conduct. The quality of being fair or impartial is called equity. And inclusion, all of us know, to include everything. So inclusion is, in nutshell, the act of including, the state of being included, the act or practice of including and accommodating people who have historically been excluded as because of their well, race, gender, sexuality, or ability, or any specific things on the basis of which people are neglected, discarded, excluded from the mainstream. So inclusion is defying all these things, rejecting the idea of exclusion. Inclusion is an effort, a well-studied, deliberated effort to include those people who have been so far marginalized. The process of inclusion has this implicit meaning with it. And so here in the discipline of education, in the process of education, we talk of inclusion, we talk of equality, equity. And so that suggests that if we have to deal with this, then we have to understand how to bring out equity and inclusion in the process of education. So defining equitable and inclusive education means, as you must be knowing, that on 10th of December 1948, the United Nations General Assembly meeting was held in Paris. And in its 183rd panel meeting, this declaration was consented by the participant countries from all over the world that education is a human right. And that was indicated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Right since then, this Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been the most translated document all over the world. Almost all the countries of the world have translated this document in their own language, and education holds a significant place in the list of human rights. So the first thing, the first notion is that education is the right of each and every individual of this world, on this planet. Now, if education is the right of each and every individual of this world, then every society, every state, every government is bound to provide the facility for education to all citizens of their countries. So that is there. Now, if that is the case, then education must be inclusive. And for education to be truly inclusive, all learners must be welcomed into the learning environment and become a valued member of the learning community within all educational settings. So that is the basic premise of the education to be inclusive. All such people, all such learners must be integrated into the learning community through culturally responsive and culturally competent processes that ensure that all voices are heard and valued. The two things, very important and very remarkably put in there, that all voices must be heard and all voices must be valued. So that is the basic spirit of education to be inclusive. And equitable education must go beyond providing the same education to all learners. It should be providing, in nutshell, the education should be provided in a way that it meets the specific needs of all the learners and ensure that all learners excel and contribute to the well-being of the community, irrespective of the differences, individual differences amongst learners. Individual differences amongst learners is not the difference of opinion. It is the differences of their individual potentialities, individual competence, individual ability, or their socio-cognitive backgrounds, the varied kind of socio-cognitive backgrounds that they come from. So irrespective of that, it is the duty of the process of education or the stakeholders or of those who are the policymakers or the implementers of any particular educational process that it should be ensured that the specific needs of all the learners must be met. And sorry, moving beyond inclusive education to equitable and inclusive education means when we add this dimension equity along with inclusion. So moving beyond this, when we talk of equitable and inclusive education, that means meeting the needs of all learners and using a strength-based assessment of skills, competencies, knowledge, and needs to support individuals to achieve healthy, prosperous, and peaceful lives. So that should be the spirit of equitable and inclusive education. Well, the basic tenets coming to the National Education Policy 2020, where this equitable and inclusive education has been promised. And when we talk of this, so let us have a look at the basic tenets of the equitable and inclusive education. What are under the basic premises? And the first is the education is the single greatest tool for achieving social justice and equality. No doubt, all of us know that. Inclusive and equitable education suggests, while indeed an essential goal in its own right, is also critical to achieving an inclusive and equitable society in which every citizen has the opportunity to dream, thrive, and contribute to the nation. So that is the basic tenet, one of the tenets, in fact, that education is a process, it is a means, and we have to gain an equitable, a just, inclusive society. And for that, education is important. And education, unless and until education in itself is equitable and inclusive, we cannot cherish the goal of an inclusive, equitable society. So that is there. The education system must aim to benefit India's children so that no child loses any opportunity to learn and excel because of circumstances of birth or background. So considering these things, these basics, this new education, national education policy reaffirms that bridging the social category gaps in access, participation, and learning outcomes in school education or education in higher education system will continue to be one of the major goals of all education sector development programs. Unless and until this equitable and inclusive education makes a continuum from the basic education to the highest of the education system, the dream of getting an equitable and inclusive society will remain unfinished, incomplete. So that is there. Now, considering on this, what this national education policy has recommended, has conceptualized, has introduced something new, coining some terms. The first one is to understand. In order to understand first, I'm going to discuss about, you can see the SEDGs, the socio-economically disadvantaged groups. First, we need to identify who are those people who fall under this category. Socio-economically disadvantaged groups. You know, like if we are into this system or any system, we understand our society the governance is a welfare-based government where public welfare is the utmost and the ultimate goal of the nation. So, in order to achieve that welfare-oriented welfare state, we have to take care of the citizens who are lagging behind. And then we see we have different categories of people identified whose development is supposedly not up to the mark so far. And for that, the Constitution of India has provided reservation facilities and other different facilities for such people. There are people from scheduled castes, people from scheduled tribes, other backward classes, and so on. Now, these different categories have been clubbed together in order to understand and in order to frame any policy, make any policy, and implement as socio-economically disadvantaged group. This national education policy document suggests that, which is broadly categorized based on gender identities that includes female and transgender individuals. We understand that even after having spent so many years after independence, we can see still, if we count on the literacy rate, we find female literacy a bit lagging behind. So females are there in the deprived section. Then transgender communities. So far, even we have been talking about gender sensitivity, but transgenders were not given due importance so far. Now, this education policy puts emphasis on the welfare of transgender individuals. Then comes under this umbrella of socio-economically disadvantaged groups, socio-cultural identities. The basis of socio-cultural identities, such as I have just discussed, SC, STs, OBCs, and minorities, because minorities were not counted so far. So far, some of them were getting different facilities or reservations, putting them into either OBC or something like that, or SC. But now this education policy document recognizes their existence and has added minority into this socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. Then this group also covers people having specific geographical identities, such as students from villages, small towns, and aspirational districts. Aspirational districts means districts where facilities are not up to the mark, but people are aware, they have their educational aspirations, they have their aspirations towards life, towards the world, but they find it difficult to procure such facilities so as they would get better support system to move ahead. So these aspirational districts. Then this SEDG group includes people having certain disabilities. There may be learning disability, there may be hearing impairment, there may be physical, orthopedic related disabilities, different sorts of disabilities we are aware of. So based on that, those people are also included in this group. Then based on the socio-economic conditions, new areas have been recognized where people have been considered to be included in this socio-economically disadvantaged group, that migrant communities, low-income households, children in vulnerable situations. We have people staying in red corridors where lots of terrorists activities, Naxalites activities are going on, and people are living in such vulnerable circumstances where there is no certainty of life. Even children go to school, their parents are not sure whether their children would come back home safely or not. So people, children living in such vulnerable state, such vulnerable situations, circumstances, or victims of, or children of victims of trafficking, orphans, child beggars in urban areas, and urban poors. The subaltern society of late sociologists are talking about. So all these people from different backgrounds have been conceptually included in this socio-economically disadvantaged group. This policy document itself gives an example, citing a data from NEPA, the UDICE 2016-17 data, that about 19.6% of students belong to scheduled caste at the primary level. But when it was studied, that when this fraction fell to 17.3% from 19.6% to 17.3% at the higher secondary level. If you calculate the actual number of students, this is a large number. And in the case of scheduled tribe, this figure is further deteriorated, where from 10.6% at primary level, the enrollment ratio fell to 6.8% at higher secondary level. So this is the situation that needs attention. Why there is so much of dropout? Why enrollment gets reduced, decreased when they move on to higher classes? I'm not here giving you any data of higher education, because this national education policy document itself pledges to achieve the enrollment ratio of 50% in higher education. So far, we have not achieved even 50%. We are at somewhere 25, 26% in terms of enrollment in higher education institutions. So by 2030, this education policy, national education policy document promises to achieve the goal of 50% of enrollment in higher education system. Look at the scenario. We are talking about becoming world guru, Vishwa Guru, but we have not yet achieved an up to mark percentage of enrollment in higher education system. And the fall in enrollment ratio is very, very of deep concerns in terms of certain section of the society. So the national education policy document has conceptualized this idea of taking care of the socio-economically disadvantaged group, and that has such a wide, umbrella, as we have discussed, just I have stated about. So but the total plan and plan of action and the implementation strategy would be focusing on providing adequate, more than sufficient means so as their educational processes do not have any hindrance. And why these things are there? Multiplicity of factors, including lack of access, quality school, poverty, social mores and customs and language have had a detrimental effect on the rates of enrollment and retention among the SEDGs. So, like this policy, and in general, the duty of each and every individual of the society, of the government, is to do something for the betterment of such people coming from such different backgrounds, but they make collectively this socio-economically disadvantaged group. Along with socio-economically disadvantaged group, there are children and learners of specific needs. And those children, those learners must be taken care of. The educational needs of such section must be taken care of. So in order to make it more effective, in order to make the implementation strategy more effective, even in the past, there have been so many schemes and policies, such as targeted scholarships, conditional cash transfers to incentivize parents to send their children to school, different like laptop, cycle, and other facilities have been provided, are being provided. But still situation is not under control completely. So it is the time to think what are the good practices available, and then how to make the most of such good practices to make this policy more effective, make this policy more fruitful. So that needs to be done for the betterment and for the effective benefit of schemes that that are being introduced for the welfare of socio-economically disadvantaged group. And for that, another conceptualization, another new idea that this national education policy has come up with is setting up of SEZs, special education zones. If any of you is aware that earlier or even now we have SEZ, like special economic zones for the betterment of industry sectors, corporate sectors. But this national education policy document has come up with a new idea of creating special education zones, SEZs. We know certain geographic areas contain significantly larger population of socio-economically disadvantaged groups. Also, there are geographical locations where that have been identified as aspirational districts, where reaching out the facilities or resources is very difficult. And the regions of the country with large population of educationally disadvantaged CDs should be declared special education zone. This is what is this new education policy promises, assures that such areas where the population or the majority of people are from socio-economically disadvantaged group, such localities, such areas will be identified and will be declared as special education zone. And then what will be done to those special education zone is that all these schemes and policies would be implemented to the maximum through additional concerted efforts in order to truly change their educational landscape. So very sincere efforts will be made. This is what this national education policy suggests, promises. And the policies and schemes designed to include students from SEDGs to be specially targeted towards girls in the SEDGs. See, one thing is this especially economically disadvantaged groups. And even in that particular group, women will be focused more because, women cut across all underrepresented groups, making up about half of the socio-economically disadvantaged groups. So again, for that, taking care of that, this national education policy document again suggests a new idea. A gender inclusion fund will be created. Government of India will constitute a gender inclusion fund to build the nation's capacity to provide equitable quality education for all girls, as well as transgender students. This fund will be available to states as well. The fund will be created by the Government of India, that is the central government, and then central government will deliberate on the priorities areas. The fund will be provided to the state governments as well, and then state governments will use this gender inclusion fund in their respective states for the benefits, for the welfare, for the education of disadvantaged girls students. So this will include provision of sanitation, toilets, bicycles, conditional cash transfers, and other things that is expected, that is anticipated to provide some good conditions where girl student can make their educational process better. They can read, they can study better, they can try to achieve their goals in their lives. So these things will be there through this gender inclusion fund. Under the aegis of the Ministry of Defense, uh, apart from gender inclusion fund, apart from setting up of SEZs, that is socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, SEZs, special education zone and gender inclusion fund, it is the plan, it is the recommendation of the National Education Policy document that under the aegis of Ministry of Defense, the state governments may encourage opening NCC wings in their schools, colleges. Different schools and colleges do have NCC wings. But recently, if you have come across a UGC document where NCC, the course curriculum of NCC has been assigned 2 credits. And if any student opt for that particular 2 credits, that if he or she gets enrolled in the National Cadet Corps program, so that student will be exempted of getting 2 credits from their core curriculum. And this NCC related 2 credits will be added to their result, helping in completing their course. So this NCC will bring other personality related positive changes, and this will enable harnessing natural talent and unique potential of students, which in turn would help them to aspire to a successful career in defense forces as well. So these things have been recommended. All scholarships and other opportunities and schemes available to students from SEDG will be coordinated and announced by a single agency and website to ensure that all students are aware of and may apply in a simplified manner on such a single window system. So a single window system to help students getting the benefits of these facilities will be created, and so that students will not have to run from pillar to post to get the facilities of these areas. In equity and inclusion in education, I have been discussing in general. Now equity and inclusion in higher education. Let us see what this National Education Policy document talks about. It says entry into quality higher education can open a vast array of possibilities that can lift both individuals as well as communities out of the cycles of disadvantages. No doubt we know that education in general, higher education in specific, enhances the quality of the life of an individual, of the family that the individual belongs to, and in general, the community, the society. So the society, as many member of the society would be having higher education, a successful higher education, the society, the development of society would be considered good based on the members of its community getting higher education. And this policy envisions ensuring equitable access to quality education to all students, with a special emphasis on SEDG. And unless and until we ensure that the education, higher education, has the attribute of equity and inclusion, we cannot cover the whole society at large. So this is the assurance of the policy. And the dynamics of, we understand, we have talked just a couple of minutes back, the reason of inclusion of SEDGs, people from the education system are common across school and higher education sectors. Therefore, the approach to equity and inclusion must be common across school and higher education institutions. And the policy initiatives required to meet the goal of equity and inclusion in higher education, and that should go hand in hand along with the conceptual envisioning of equity and inclusion that is provided at school education level. So school education level and higher education level should be in continuum in terms of providing equitable and inclusive education. And we know lack of knowledge of higher education opportunities, economic opportunity, cost of pursuing higher education, financial constraints, admission processes, geographical and language barriers, poor employability potential of many higher education programs, and lack of appropriate student support mechanisms. These things are barriers in terms of providing equitable and inclusive education. And if we as a nation want to provide equitable and inclusive education to our students belonging to all sections of society, belonging to including SEDGs group as well, we must address these constraints. We must address these hindrances, and removing such hindrance and constraints only then we can achieve the goal. So achieving the goal, the National Education Policy document has pointed out certain things that the government should take up, and that is earmark suitable government funds for the education of SEDGs, set clear targets for higher gross enrollment ratios and socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, then enhance gender balance in admission to higher education, though government does not have any gender biased policy, but still lots of additional efforts are needed to be done to ensure that girl students are at par with the boy students in education system, particularly in higher education institutions, because it has been seen that just after passing school education or higher education, they are married, then they have their own life that is typical to this traditional society. So if we need to have a balance between girls and boys enrollment in higher education system, government needs to make extra efforts, society needs to make extra efforts. So that is there. And for that, enhance access by establishing more high quality higher education institution in aspirational districts and special education zones containing larger number of socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. Develop, we have so far in our country 900 universities, around 40,000 colleges, and a number of standalone institutions. In an estimation, it has been estimated that we need at least each of the districts of this country needs one university. So far, there is a concentration of universities in particular areas, and some areas are deprived of any higher education institutions. So today we are having 900 universities. This country needs around 1,500 universities, and then this autonomous colleges have been visualized in this national education policy. So the government needs to enhance access. Government needs to develop and support high quality higher education institutions that teach in local or Indian language or bilingually. Then government needs to provide more financial assistance and scholarships to socio-economically disadvantaged groups in both public and private higher education institutions. No doubt, this national education policy document has just dismantled the partition, the margin, or the dividing margin of between private and government institutions. It clearly states that there would be no difference in government education institutions or private education institutions, including government universities and private universities. So it will have same facilities, same policy, and everything pertaining to that. The clear plan of action is yet to come, though. because this implementation strategy in the process. And let us see, let us wait what sort of the plan of action comes before us, before the country. Government needs to conduct outreach programs on all higher education opportunities and scholarships among economically disadvantaged groups. And it should develop and support technological tools in order to make the higher education program more qualitative in nature. Government should mitigate opportunity costs and fees for pursuing higher education. It should provide more financial assistance and scholarships. It should conduct outreach. It should increase employability potential of higher education programs. It should make curriculum more inclusive. Admission process should be made more inclusive. Uh, Different degree courses should be introduced in Indian languages and bilingually. Language is another major concern. So far, we have been having in our country uh, um, uh, uh, an unsaid, unwritten, but perceived notion of quality in higher education is that is English is the medium of higher education. English is the medium of quality in education. This national education policy document, even before this particular national education policy document, there has been a large and wide scale discussion about what should be the medium of instruction, what should be, which language should one uh, adopt in getting any educational qualification in studying any particular program. And widely it is accepted based on the scientific research, based on the linguistic research, that a student can understand better, much better in his or her own language than the other language. Understanding, studying, learning other language or different foreign languages is no way bad. Definitely, as many languages we can learn, we should learn. But understanding any particular concept of a deep-rooted, deepest of the notions having different disciplines, one can understand much better in their own language. So this is the thing, this national education policy suggests that uh, Indian language or bilingually at least, courses must be taught in educational institutions. And then the government must develop courses for students, bridge courses, particularly for students that come from such disadvantaged educational backgrounds. It should provide socio-emotional and academic support and mentoring for all such students who have come from a different disadvantaged socio-economically, socio-cognitive background. So it should be having a mentoring system. Again, this national education policy has, in some other part of the document, suggested to establish a national mentoring mission. And that national mentoring mission would be having experts from all walks of life. They would be there, available there to provide support, to provide guidance and counseling to students who find at some point of time throughout in their educational processes, in their educational journey, things difficult. So these mentors would be there to help them, to support them. So these things are there. And then this government must strictly enforce all no discrimination and anti-harassment rules. No doubt, still we do have anti-harassment rules in existence. But yes, it must be enforced properly, strictly. And it is also envisaged in this national education policy document that government should encourage and should lay out specific plan, that it should develop institutional development plans that contain specific plans for action on increasing participation from this SED-Z groups. So these things are there, which uh, have been conceptualized, which have been envisaged in this national education policy document to make the educational process at all levels of education, starting from the early childhood care education to the highest of the qualification level at the university system, the educational processes must be inclusive, must be equitable. These were some of the recommendations of the National Education Policy meant for making educational process more equitable, more inclusive. Let us come to the second part, which is the multidisciplinary education. We are talking here in terms of, in the context of multidisciplinary higher education. You know, the education so far, there has been lots of progress, there has been lots of emancipation. When we talk of educational process or the context some 50 years back, even some 20, 30 years back, and now, lots of liberalization has been taking place throughout. But yet, we find in our education system, you must be aware, we have still certain boundaries of the discipline of science, the discipline of arts, discipline of commerce, though lots of interdisciplinary programs have been introduced, of course. And we know that earlier we had, in our time, we had physics, chemistry, biology, or maybe biology having zoology and botany. Now you can see we have biophysics, biochemistry, lots of other interdisciplinary courses, many such. Still, it is felt, considering that we are in the process of making our individual citizens a global citizen, then it is the need of the time to understand first what it is to make a learner a bachelor of any particular academic program, or bachelor or master of any particular academic program. Is it Master of Science? Is it Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Commerce that makes one's life more significant? You know, the National Education Policy document discusses at length about the ancient educational system, how different courses were perceived in that. You can see in the slides that I have shared, drawing on from the National Education Policy document. Earlier, we have Ban Bhatt's Kadambari. There was a text that describes education as a knowledge of the 64 arts, kalas. And these 64 arts were not only subjects, any specific subjects, or just a combination of certain subjects like singing and painting, but also scientific fields such as chemistry, mathematics, vocational fields as well, such as carpentry, clothes making, professional fields such as medicines, engineering, and soft skills such as communication, discussion, and debate. All these were considered. You can just refer to that book, Kadambari, authored by Ban Bhatt, where all these discipline of knowledges have been considered as kalas, as arts. And there were as many as 64 arts that discussed in that. So what it is meant by saying when we say a person has become a bachelor of any particular discipline. Now, this National Education Policy document introduces another idea of liberal arts, a liberal notion of arts, a liberal arts that this liberal arts, a pair of words, suggests that it is liberal in terms of confining one particular subject into watertight compartment. So far we have been, like if I have to study at 12th, if I'm a science stream, PCM, then I'll have to study physics, chemistry, and mathematics. If I'm intending to join medical stream, then I'll have to study physics, chemistry, biology. Why shouldn't I study psychology? Why shouldn't I study sociology? That will make me a better doctor or a better engineer or a better management professional if I study. Is it needed that I only study a certain part of psychology in that particular MBA program? Shouldn't I study it? Why shouldn't I study it from the beginning? So these things are the consideration, very new idea, liberalizing, breaking the boundaries of science, arts, and commerce disciplines. These liberal arts will include all the subjects, and students will have this liberty of choosing any combination of subjects. This is what this national education policy document suggests. Idea that all branches of creative human behavior, including mathematics, science, vocational subjects, vocational, etc., will constitute a bouquet of liberal arts, and a student will have liberty to choose. No doubt, while choosing, one will take care of his or her career, where which subjects are needed the most. But at the same time, if one wishes, if one can put their energy into that, time and energy, then one can go for studying history, go for value education. And we can see that um, uh, devoid of Indian value system, devoid of our own traditional and cultural knowledge, uh, by just gaining technical knowledge, our kids are becoming, robot-like. They are becoming ATMs-like, money-making, money-minting machines, devoid of values, devoid of different things. And because of that, so many complications you can find in society. They're not able to cope up with. So liberal art, the concept of liberal art will provide a platform where students can get to study some different uh, areas of knowledge, along with the combination of specific combination of subjects that will help them excel in their respective career. So that is the concept of liberal arts. And then we have STEM approach that this national education policy document suggests, and that is assessment of educational approaches to undergraduate education that will integrate humanities and arts along with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So this is what is suggested. And because of that, because of the any particular engineering or technological or medical education being void of Indian values or other, humanities related spirits, we are finding it difficult nowadays, our professionals coping up with the practicalities of life. So in order to bridge that gap, this has been visualized. This policy again suggests a holistic and multidisciplinary education. Multidisciplinary education, we have just seen that different disciplines, different subjects would be available. Now, a particular duration of courses have their limits in order to how many subjects one can study during bachelor's or during master phase. So for that, it has been suggested that the bachelor degree should be of 4 years with multiple exit points, multiple entry, multiple exit points. So instead of 3 years, the bachelor degree should be 4 years. In American universities, you will find that even general arts degrees, history, civics, economics, whatever you go for, you'll have to study for 4 years, along with an engineering student does his engineering education. So similarly, this 4 years bachelor program will provide more opportunities to learners to get in touch with other different subjects of more credits. No doubt, this 3 years program will remain in existence, but ultimately, eventually, this will go, and these 4-year bachelor programs will remain. One can, considering the practicalities of life, the realities of life, needs of families, if one wishes to take a break to study, it has been visualized. Now, all of you must be aware that if you join a bachelor program, and if you wish after 1 year that you need to do some more important things in life, you can part, you can go, you can exit. A certificate will be given to you. based on the number of subjects and credits that you have earned, you have passed. Say, supposedly, if you want to exit after 2 years, then you'll be given a diploma. After 3 years, a normal bachelor degree, or after 4 years, if you continue, then you'll be getting a bachelor degree with an enhanced number of credits, or a bachelor degree with research. So these things have been conceptualized, are being worked out by different universities and by UGCs. And it has been visualized now that there have been so far in our nation, in our country, institutions having certain limited number of courses. Now this national education policy says that every institution will be a multidisciplinary education where all possible courses must be there. No doubt, we can feel the problem in implementing such things, because that will require a number of faculty, that will require infrastructure, academic infrastructure, physical infrastructure. But at the same time, in order to meet the need of heavy pressure of courses in demand in coming in future, it is also suggested, it has been suggested, if you have seen UGC letters or some circular, that up to 40% or 20% students can join online programs from Swayam portals and other courses where they do not need to actually sit in the classroom. They'll be sitting in the virtual classroom. So a certain component of these loads can be shared by our virtual partners, our online partners, and towards the attainment of this degree program of 4 years, or making about master degree program, it has been suggested that after 4 years one can get into 1 year master program, in a way accommodating and adjusting the total number of periods or years earlier one had to spend in completing bachelor and master degree 5 years. So even after 4 years, one can join a 1 year program, master program, or otherwise a 2 years master program will remain in existence for those who are coming from completing after completion of 3 years bachelor program. So it has, all these provisions have been made in the national education policy documents, and lots of subjects from all areas: climate change, management, sanitation, vaccination, biological diversity, you name any, ethical, constitutional, human, universal values, dharma, peace, love, a Bharat-centric, India-centric stream of education need to be included in order to become truly Indian and global citizen as well. Indian in terms of our strong value system. And now even people from Western countries are now turning towards India for getting, spiritual attainment, for family values, for social values. And we have that, all that. So education should be a combination of all these knowledge sources that will provide an opportunity for an all-round development that Mahatma Gandhi envisaged, that all the Manishis of our country envisaged. And for that, 3 years or 4 years bachelor degree program, 1 year or 2 years master degree program will have all these facilities. This national education policy document, in order to assist in implementing these conceptualized scheme, has come up with another unique idea of academic bank of credits, ABC. And this is a sort of a virtual bank where all the academic credits will be stored, earned by the students, earned by students of various recognized higher education institutions, so that after completing a particular year or period, their credits will be stored in that digital academic bank of credits. And after a certain period, if they wish to join that or their his or her parent institution, or moves to join courses in some other institution, that academic credits will be stored in that bank and will be utilized in order to fulfilling the requirement of getting a degree of either bachelor degree or master degree. So this academic bank of credit is a unique idea that, again, this national education policy has come up with. Another thing that this national education policy document suggests is of setting up of model public universities for holistic and multidisciplinary education at par with IITs, IIMs, etc. And these will, in general, their specific names will be there, but in general, these universities will be called MERUs, Multidisciplinary Education and Research University. So these will be set up to attain the highest global standards in quality education. And they will also help set the highest standards for multidisciplinary education across India. So, like, these things are there to make higher education of India more diverse in nature, more multidisciplinary in nature. It will have innovative programs, innovations in education, startup incubation centers, technology development centers, centers in frontier areas of research, greater industry academic linkages, and interdisciplinary research, including humanities and social sciences research. Given the scenario of epidemics and pandemics, it is critical that higher education institutions take the lead to undertake research in areas of infectious diseases, which we have been the whole humanity has been suffering since last 1.5 or 2 years almost now, at least 1.5 years, sort of, or 2 years, let us count it as. So new areas where humanities is threatened, where we can do something for the betterment, for the welfare of humanities. It should be the duty of higher education system to come up with the solutions to the problems that the mankind is facing. So all these things will be there. A national research foundation has been conceptualized by the national education policy that will work on conducting researches on such areas that will be beneficial for humanity. So all these things will make, if implemented in words and spirit, our higher education system more versatile, more diverse in nature, and more multidisciplinary in nature. We can only hope that the conceptual points envisioning of the national education policy get implemented in words and spirit. Then our educational institution will have multidisciplinarity in its character, and will have Indian as well as global knowledge strength and reservoir of knowledge. And that will definitely make human lives better, more advantageous, more qualitative. Let us hope for that. And it is our duty as teachers, as educationists, or as learners, that we should grasp, we should internalize the spirit of all these things that have been conceptualized in this national education policy. And merely grasping, internalizing is not sufficient. It should be translated into our behavior, so that as teachers, we can implement these things. It is not just the government who is supposed to implement. We must understand our own responsibilities, our own duties, what we can, in our own individual capacity, do the best, so that the whatever has been envisioned in this national education policy get implemented, at least for our own, at our own level, to our own extent, to the best of our extent. That way, we would be doing justice to our profession, to our own existence. This is what I wish to say by completing my deliberation on this topic. Thank you very much.